Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to dig into a story that, well, it literally glows, with both wonder and, frankly, horror. It's a tale about a miracle element, some unbelievable corporate greed, and the young women who paid the highest price imaginable, changing our world forever in the process. And their story? It begins in a place you'd absolutely never expect.
So, picture this. It's the middle of the night, totally dark, and a small, determined group is standing in a cemetery. You've got a young doctor and three women, and they start digging up a coffin. But no, they're not grave robbers. They're searching for a terrible truth, one they believe is buried 6 feet under with their friend. And when they finally pry open that casket, this faint, eerie green light starts to pour out. The skeleton of their friend is actually glowing. And this isn't some ghost story, you guys. This was evidence. Evidence of a poison so insidious it had literally fused with her bones. This one single haunting question would end up unraveling a massive corporate cover-up.
So how in the world did we get here? Well, to figure that out, we've got to rewind the clock to the early 1900s, when the world was in the middle of a full-blown radium craze. See, after being discovered just a few decades earlier, radium became the wonder element of the age. Seriously, think of it like the Tesla or the Apple of its time. It was this huge status symbol that promised a brighter, healthier, more modern future. It was expensive, it was exclusive, and absolutely everyone wanted to get their hands on it.
And I mean, it was everywhere. Companies were putting radium in, and I'm not kidding, everything. You could buy radium-laced cosmetics, toothpaste that promised a radiant smile, and even these so-called life-extending tonics. It was sold as a cure-all, even for things like cancer. If a product had radium in it, it was instantly seen as top of the line. But then, World War I kicks off, and suddenly there's this huge new demand. Soldiers in the trenches, pilots in their planes, they all needed to see their instruments in the dark without using a flashlight and giving away their position. A company called the U.S. Radium Corporation had the perfect solution: a luminous paint made from radium. And the pay? The pay was incredible. We're talking 3 times the average wage. For young women from working-class families, a job as a dial painter wasn't just a job. It was like a golden ticket to financial freedom and a whole new social status. Now, the work itself was super delicate. To paint these tiny little numbers on the watch dials, the painters needed a perfectly fine point on their brushes. So the company taught them a special trick. They called it the lip dip technique. They'd put the brush between their lips, twirl it to a point, and then dip it in the paint. And they'd do this hundreds of times a day, swallowing a tiny bit of radium with every single watch face they painted. You know, the women even had a nickname, the Ghost Girls. Radium dust would get all over their clothes and hair, and it would make them literally glow in the dark when they got home. They thought it was this glamorous little perk of the job. But very soon, that glow would turn sinister as the poison they were swallowing every day began to take its devastating toll. To really understand, let's look at what happened to one of the workers, Amelia. At first, it was just aches and pains, the kind of stuff you just brush off. But then it got worse, unbearable. Her teeth started to rot and her jaw was in constant throbbing pain. Finally, she went to a dentist to get one loose tooth pulled. And what happened next? I mean, it's straight out of a horror movie. The dentist tugged, and a huge chunk of her jawbone just broke away in his forceps. The infection was so deep, so horrific, that her bones were literally crumbling from the inside out. Amelia died in agony a year later, and she was far from the only one. So as more and more of these young women started getting sick with these bizarre, horrifying symptoms, U.S. Radium sprang into action. But not to help them. Oh no. They went straight into cover-up mode. They bribed doctors to diagnose the women with syphilis, a sexually transmitted disease that, back then, carried this immense social shame. It was a cruel, calculated lie designed to discredit the women, shame them into silence, and protect the company's bottom line. And this right here, this just shows you the absolute, blatant hypocrisy of it all. Because they knew radium was dangerous the whole time. While these young women were handling raw radium in their everyday clothes, the male executives and scientists at the very same company were working with it wearing full lead-lined suits and heavy-duty gloves. They knew the risks, and they chose to sacrifice their female workers. Okay, so here's the terrifying science behind what was actually happening inside their bodies. Chemically, Radium looks a lot like calcium, so when the women ingested it, their bodies were basically tricked. The radium was absorbed and went straight into their bones. But instead of making them stronger, it just sat there, emitting constant, cell-destroying radiation from the inside out.
So, the company thought they had it all figured out. They thought their lie would stick. They figured the women would just die quietly, their names and reputations ruined. But they seriously underestimated the bond between these friends and their will to get to the truth.
But Amelia's friends, they were furious. They knew she wasn't some liar. They knew she was sick. They went from doctor to doctor begging someone, anyone, to investigate, but no one would listen. They were all on the company's payroll. And finally, they found one person, a young doctor just out of school named Harrison, who was actually willing to listen. So Dr. Harrison gets to work. He does his own investigation, he tests the factory, and he finds that the radiation levels are just off the charts. And then, of course, came the exhumation of Amelia's body, which proved beyond a shadow of a doubt that her bones were saturated with radium. So now he's got this undeniable proof, right? And he takes it straight to the company. And you know what the company executives did? They pretended to be totally shocked. They asked Dr. Harrison for a copy of his report so they could present it to the government, and then they just rewrote the whole thing. Every number, every single finding was changed from dangerous to perfectly safe. They lied to the government, they lied to the public, and they kept that factory running. Okay, so the women decide, that's it, we're suing. But the entire system was just completely stacked against them. Lawyers were too scared of the company's power to take the case. Doctors had been bought and paid for. And the worst part? The law itself was a trap. The statute of limitations was only 2 years, but radium poisoning, it took more than 5 years to even show symptoms. Legally speaking, their fight looked absolutely impossible. So here they are, battered, literally dying, and staring down this totally corrupt system. It really looked like it was over, but their fight wasn't done. A new lawyer and one shocking piece of evidence were about to change everything. But then, a young, hungry lawyer named Raymond takes their case, and suddenly it's all over the national news. The public was horrified. But in court, the company played just the dirtiest, most cynical game you can imagine. Delay, delay, delay. They knew the women were on death's door, so they stalled proceedings, they interfered with evidence, they did everything they could to make sure the plaintiffs would be dead before a verdict could ever be reached. Some of these women had to give their testimony from their hospital beds. But then came the smoking gun, the final piece of evidence that nobody could argue with. The actual inventor of the radium paint, a man named Mr. Koki, had also died. And his cause of death? Radium poisoning. The proof came from the very man who created the invention. The company had absolutely nowhere left to hide. So against all odds, the Radium Girls won. And while the money came way too late for many of them, their fight had this incredible, monumental impact that we still feel today. Their case led directly to sweeping new workers' safety laws. It established the right for individual workers to sue corporations for damages, and it laid the groundwork for the creation of the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, what we know today as OSHA. You know, their story is just this incredible, harrowing reminder of the human cost that sometimes comes with progress and corporate greed. And it really makes you stop and think, right? What protections do we have in our own lives, at our own jobs, that we just completely take for granted? And who had to fight and even die for us to have them?